Right. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So, inshallah, we're going to be continuing the ayat that we were doing yesterday. يا أيها الذين آمنوا شهادة بينكم إذا حضر أحدكم الموت حين الوصية اثنان ذوي عدل منكم. We talked about the story. To summarize the story, we basically said that there were two people, basically Tamim al-Dari and Adi ibn Badda. They were both Christian at the time. Adi never became Muslim, but Tamim became Muslim. Tamim al-Dari was actually a person that became Muslim and later was the main narrator for the story about al-Jassasa. That's a different conversation to talk about. But anyhow, the story is basically Tamim al-Dari, Adi ibn Badda. They went to a Christian area or a non-Muslim area. There they had with them a man from the tribe of Bani Sahm, and he basically had a lot of money that he was supposed to be making business with for the tribe of Bani Sahm. Yet in the middle of the way, this man dies, but he made a will in regards to the money that it would be given back. That it would be given back to the tribe of Bani Sahm, but then, of course, they gave the cash, but they didn't give a valuable item, which was a silver jug that had some golden ornament on it. And they didn't give that. They had basically made an oath and basically said that there was nothing left other than the cash that was given back to them. And of course, the family insisted that there is a valuable item, but they insisted that there was nothing that was in his valuables and items. Therefore, they shouldn't be responsible for it or liable in any way. Later on, of course, that jug was found with some people in Mecca, and when it was investigated, they basically had admit buying it from Tamim and Adi, and of course. The family, which is Bani Sahm, they went to complain to the Prophet ﷺ. We found our jug, and these people had said that they had bought it from Tamim and Adi, who had claimed that they had never seen that item and it was not part of that man that is the deceased man's belongings, and therefore they should not be liable. So when, of course, the Prophet ﷺ had made the trial before, now they're making an appeal. The appeal with the new evidence basically brought forward to bring about justice and say, well, Tamim and Adi, you are now liable because the witness that you had made before is basically had been proven to be basically a fraud, and it was now proven that you had kept the item and you had sold it to these people in order to get money instead. Now, it's important to mention that Tamim al-Dari later, after becoming Muslim, he was feeling guilty about it. He later confessed that he had sold the item, him and along with Adi, they sold it for 1,000 currency, some currency that they had at the time, and that he took 500, the other one took 500, so he paid back the 500 of what he had taken, at least that was his share, to the people of Bani Sahm. So this ayah was in order to speak about such situations, such circumstances when two are basically wanting, or one is wanting to make a will. And in regards to the will, there are a number of different issues that we must say. So this was definitely a very rare circumstance where you have hey, one Muslim and the others are not Muslim, and they're in an area where documentation was not possible. There was no way to document it. So the only ones that were witnesses on all of this were basically two non-Muslims. So how do we deal with this? Do we accept the non-Muslim witness? Do we accept basically that other evidence that we might prove against, or let's say that voids their witness? What evidences do we have to bring forth to probably void that witness, and so forth? So that's what that ayah is talking about. Why is it talking about that? I thought the Quran was a book of guidance. There's no contradiction, because a book of guidance is not necessarily, when we speak about guidance, guidance is not exclusive to knowing about purpose of life and to knowing about Allah and so forth, but it's also learning about the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of the different circumstances. That's what it means to recognize the purpose, the principle, and certainly how to live in justice. So the Quran would lay out certain things. A couple of things to say about wills. Number one, there is a general hadith. So two sides. Let's just kind of write down some things to help us understand will and how we relate with will and so forth. So I'm going to share a different screen with you in order for us to kind of see a couple things here. Let's see. So when we're speaking about wills, or the word wasiyah, a couple things to talk about wills. Number one, in general, when we speak about a will, it must be on things that are halal. So there's no question about that. You can't make a will to, I don't know, donate a liquor store. That's too obvious to even talk about. Number two is that the will, the will, it doesn't have to be made only if you had the money. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ had basically made a will and had directed the Muslims to not sleep unless they would have their will written next to them. In other words, it's underneath their pillow, it's around them. And then scholars, so here's that one. Is will obligatory or not, or is making a will obligatory? So I'll just, you understand what I'm saying. Okay. Now, the scholars had differences of opinions because the Prophet ﷺ had said, you do not sleep unless you would make a will that would be next to you. And scholars had differences of opinions on whether that makes writing wills obligatory or whether it is a sunnah, meaning recommended. You had three, or actually more, but let's look at the first opinion. The first opinion said it was obligatory, and their evidence, let's write it right there, write down. The first opinion said it was obligatory, and their evidence was saying that, well, that you should not sleep unless their wasiyah is written next to them. So they said, well, this is actually showing an indication that this is an imperative verb, an imperative statement telling you that you have to do that. If it's an imperative statement, that would make it obligatory. That would mean you would be at sin for not doing it. The second opinion said it was a sunnah, and sunnah would mean recommended. And the reason why they said it was recommended, they said, well, it wouldn't be obligatory to make any will if you don't really have anything that needs to be channeled in a certain area. So if I'm a poor person, I don't have a lot of money, I don't have any debts and or probably anything that I owe. I don't really have much to say. Just make dua for me. Well, everybody knows to say Allah yarhamha. I don't have a lot of money. I don't have any I guess debt to owe. Therefore, they said, here's the evidence, is that it's recommended that you would do that just out of spiritual reasons, that you would recognize that this could be your last night and this could be your, your last moment, and that even if you don't have to make any type of a will in regards to the different property that you had left behind, the different wealth, whatever it is, but it would be recommended just for a spiritual inspiration. So they basically considered that it's a spiritual inspiration and not necessarily some mandation due to rights. So they basically regarded that it would be a mandatory, it would be mandating, it would be obligatory to make a will in situations where you have something that you have to pay back, maybe an expiation to pay. Maybe you owe someone some money that you did not give and that you want that to be deducted from your money or your inheritance or whatever it is. So in that situation, they considered that it would be obligatory only if other people's rights were involved, and it would be for spiritual inspiration. That would be basically a sunnah. The third opinion basically went into making this classification and considered, well, no, doing a wasiyah, doing a will is basically highly recommended, because when it's highly recommended, that means you basically have to recognize that always make a will for some good cause, some good investment. So they said it's highly recommended because you have to have some good investment. Well, what if I didn't have any money? Well, even if you were to say, like, ittaqullah, today was maybe my last night. I want you to remember, take care of each other. Hey, Mu'adh, take care of your sister Sarah, or whatever it is. Even it doesn't have to be in regards to basically will involving money, but it could be a will involving good, let's say, good akhlaq or good deen, or just something that would be a spiritual inspiration from you to them, and that it would involve something that would reflect on you, that you took the moment to think about it. So I guess the second opinion and the third opinion, they kind of correlate with one another. Now, the other thing in regards to will is that it cannot be given, if we're talking about money, it cannot be given to someone that is already an inheritor. So what does that mean? That means if, let's say, you basically had, let's give him a certain amount of money, let's say $10,000. Okay, the $10,000 are going to go for your inheritors, your children, your husband, and let's say your daughters, etc. Okay. Now, can you make a will that, let's say, your daughter Sarah would get extra compared to her brothers or compared to her siblings? The answer is no. Why? Because Sarah is already an inheritor because she's your daughter. There's no question about that. Okay? So because Sarah is already an inheritor, to add on to the portion that she's already taking would basically mean that there's some favoritism practiced, and Islam considers that that's not justice. The other thing is that it cannot be more than 1/3 of the property left behind. Okay. So let's say you are donating, let's say, all your money to a school. You cannot donate all your money to a school. The only amount that can be deducted from your income or from your inheritance, the money that was left behind, is basically 1/3 given to the well, but then The rest is what is going to be distributed amongst the inheritors. But it on a condition that it does not exceed 1/3. What if it did exceed 1/3 and the inheritors accepted? Let's say all the children accepted, every inheritor accepted, and they said, you know what? We've got money. We're okay. But I basically am looking at a will where it's involving more than 1/3 of the property left behind, and that it's involving probably 50% of the property left behind. If the inheritors approve that, then that can be implemented. Okay. But if one does not approve, then that one that does not approve it would get their share. If the others want to donate their share, who would get the reward? You would get the reward. That is the inheritor that approved, plus the person that had made the will. Wait a minute. So are they going to be like, I guess, a share of 50-50? Or is it going to be, nope, غير منقوص on that end? It's not going to be deducted from anything. So it's not that they are sharing, let's just say, the $2,000 that was donated, but each one is getting the same amount of good deeds. So the deceased person would be as if they had donated that amount, $2,000, as a hypothetical amount that we just laid out. And the one that approved would also get the reward of donating $2,000. Okay, so this is basically just an idea in regards to will. But how is the will made? In order to make the will, one, documentation is very important, but doesn't have to be documented. How do we document it? So the way you would document the will, one, it depends on the area you're living in. So if we're talking about an area that probably requires a title, probably requires notary, then in that situation, you would basically have to do it in that way. Even in Islamic courts, let's say this person owned a house and they said, well, I own it. Even the Islamic court nowadays will say, I would like some evidence, documented evidence, and it's not necessarily enough to say things verbally, but we need documented evidence. Even though, if you were to look at historically, did the Prophet ﷺ necessarily document things in the way we would document things today? The answer is no. They didn't have the resources to document things the way that the bureaucratic system is basically managed. So what they used to do, they used to depend a lot on one, the witnesses. Okay, so one, they used to depend on the witnesses, and two, which is culture. So we would look at culture. I want you to keep this one in mind because many uh Okay, if we're talking about culture, many things that probably, okay, were not necessarily mentioned by the witnesses, mentioned by certain, of course, titles, etc., then in that situation, we can consider a certain culture. The only times that we would void that culture is basically when I would have some strong evidence voiding this norm. Why is culture considered important in Islam? So culture would be important because it relates to the communication between people. It's basically the hidden communication between people. It's basically a type of subliminal, let's call it general cultural knowledge between people, that they basically have this way that without even saying it, and it becomes something that is common between them, and therefore culture. I want you to look at that one. العادة محكمة. What does that mean? العادة محكمة simply means that culture is a resource. It's a reference that we would use even in trials, even in Sharia. العادة محكمة. Not everything in culture we would disregard. Okay, so this is just a fast thing about will. And of course, this ayah is basically involving this issue, which basically is the witnesses. Can the witnesses be non-Muslims? Can I basically go to, let's say, a post office? The person that was witnessing on this contract is basically Rishna, and the other person was, let's say, Christine, and we've got a Hindu and I've got a Christian right there. Can I use those as witnesses on something that is going to be notarized? Is that an evidence? Can we use that or not? Then we'll go into the different debates between scholars. Okay. Okay. Let's see. The sister is asking if there's nothing except books then. Books will be distributed or sold. Can we make a will that is an amana of this and that institution should be handed over to them after his death because uh, you made a commitment with that institute? Well, yes, if you make a will, and in that situation, you're probably meaning waqf. And waqf in that situation, it's best to document it. And when you are making to a certain institution, it's important to let the person or the institution that you're making a will to aware of that in order to ask for it. Two, documentation during life is important because certainly what I mean by during life, meaning before you are even ill. Wait a minute. Why before even being ill? Because scholars had differences of opinions, which basically is related to when a person is sick with some, let's call it a fatal disease or a chronic disease, and then this basically becomes something that, hey, this person is going into some form of hallucination. Hey, they're taking these very heavy narcotics, very heavy medications in order to keep them, I guess, in less pain and etc. But then this person is going in and out. We don't fully know whether this person is completely aware of what they're saying. They're signing a paper when they were, I guess, conscious, but we don't really know completely whether they were aware of what they're doing. So there's that piece when we're speaking about مرض الوفاة, when we're speaking about the reason, we're speaking about the illness, a specific illness, what led to death, are we going to be taking that will that was written while someone was preparing for their last days? Is that will going to basically be considered or not? That's a different opinion between scholars. We're not just talking about um, wills, we're also talking about divorce. We're talking about, let's say, a man was married to a second wife, and then the children, they basically wanted to get the most out of the inheritance, out of their dying father. So they pressured him and said, you got to right now sign these papers that you're divorcing, let's say Selma, or else we're going to get angry. And of course, they're pressuring him. And right now he's on his deathbed, very weak, barely can talk and all of that. But then just to get them off his back, he basically accepts to sign this divorce decree in order for the children to get basically a bigger portion of inheritance. This happens a lot. Now, this divorce would not be valid. Okay. This divorce would not be valid, and therefore the wife has the right to document have witnesses that this is what happened during this date. On this day, he was diagnosed, and the diagnose basically said, the following. He had a couple days left. This is what the palliative care had stated, and this is the situation, the report, the doctor's report, and what he was going through, and that the children basically had pressured their father to divorce me, for example, all of that. This is an example. Do we apply the same thing to wills or not? How far, how long, when, etc.? That's another place of debate. Okay, that's another place of debate. How do we prove that this person died in a chronic illness? We're not talking about a chronic illness where doctors are estimating. Yes, الأعمار بيد الله. The lives of people is basically in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but still, doctors would use a number of different, let's call it evaluations, in order to estimate how long is this person expected to stay alive for. They don't give you exact timings for sure, but they'll give you an approximate thing based on a number of different studies. And of course, the advancement of the illness is going to determine how long it takes the body to shut down before, of course, they're looking at the speed that it's basically advancing, and or at least basically going into failure. And they'll also anticipate, based on the speed of that, let's call it collapse, the collapse within the body. And then they'll anticipate, well, looking at the speed, it's going to be 2 weeks. Looking at the speed, looking 3 weeks, and the body needs 1, 2, 3, 4 things to function. If therefore these things are shutting down, then therefore the person, not long, they will basically be considered dead, or at least clinically dead for a certain time before their final deaths. And certainly, always the question of can we pull the plug is always something that people would ask. And this is a case by case. We would look into the case. We would look into is there a possibility that the body could probably get back, especially if we're speaking about a person called in a vegetable state, where there's no, of course, all you could see is their brain. MRI scans are showing that this person, vegetable state, yes, their heart is pumping, their lungs are working, all of that. But then this person, even if they were to probably live, they would be extremely in extreme pain. They would be dead basically in their ability to understand. Yes, their eyes are moving, but of course, here's one thing that happens in the back end. And I did chaplaincy in hospitals for some time. So what they would do sometimes, the hospitals, they would have a number of different wards. If there's a person that is already dying, the person that is dying, the doctors would basically know that there's no cure for this one. You would call some of the best hospitals and they won't even take this person, because to them, that's going to be marked just as a person that died, and a failure on behalf of that a hospital to cure a patient that they had basically had within their care. Now, what happens is that the hospital, the staff, they then go into a debate. Should we convince the family of this patient to pull the plug, which is going to expedite the death of this person, or should we basically keep a ward occupied and someone else, probably in the emergency room, if they were to probably take this space, they have a higher chance of living, because they would hey, this person entered their emergency room and their issue is not too dangerous. They have a high chance of living, but they need a ward to basically be available to them. And that's that debate that happens behind the scenes. And I'll tell you, that's one main reason I left hospital chaplaincy, because in the back end, there's a completely different thing that goes on. And they would speak with the chaplains, that is, the hospital staff would speak with the chaplains and say, hey, we've got another patient. This patient has no hope. And sometimes the doctors themselves may even pressure the chaplain to convince them that it's a good idea. Hey, let him rest in peace. He's going through a lot of pain, etc. And sometimes the chaplains can be, I would say, pressured to even give such a fatwa, or to even give, I guess, such an encouragement to pull the plug, etc. Now, should we pull the plug? What does that mean? Do we have to let that, which is do not resuscitate, all of that, do we have to leave the person under these machines that are breathing for him, pumping the blood, doing dialysis, doing all these different things for that dying person? Or do we have to leave these machines working even though the person is actually in a state of dying? It's just an issue of time. So that's that area of differences of opinions. It goes back to the whole debate that scholars debated. Do we have to medicate? That's the question. Do we have to medicate? Do we have to, which is better? Here's one question. Do we have to medicate? Two, is it better? Let's say it that way. Is it better to go through pain, or is it better to be patient? That's another debate. And it's a huge debate between scholars, because let's look at the first one. Do we have to medicate? Well, the Prophet ﷺ said that every single illness that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically sent a cure for it. It's an issue of finding the cure. It's an issue of making the cure, etc. So we already know that there is a cure, but do we necessarily have to take that medication? That's a question. Do we have to seek treatment? The Prophet ﷺ seek treatment, but do we have to seek treatment is the question. That's another debate. Okay. Now, the other one, which is basically, well, I know, for example, that maybe oxycodone, or perhaps, these different medications, narcotics, different, um, uh, you know, I don't know, different medications to take away your, probably diazepam, maybe to take away your dizziness, or perhaps oxycodone, or maybe another medication, Percocet, whatever, to take down the pain, etc. All these, do I have to take them is the question. Is it better to take those medications? Epidural for a woman that's getting a baby. Is it best for her to feel the pain? Or is it better, hey, you got epidural, or yeah, I don't know, maybe perhaps you got some studies that encourage you not to take epidural, whatever. That's a different research that medical experts will do. But we're talking about, okay, is it better to medicate to remove the pain, or is it better to stay patient and to basically endure the pain? That's another debate. So the first group of scholars, they said, well, if you were to remove the pain, that'll give you a clarity of mind to be able to be a better Muslim, to be able to probably do your ibadah, to probably be a person that is basically functioning as somebody that is in a situation with less pain. Here we go. The second opinion, they said, well, if you are to medicate, And if you are to use, we're not talking about medication for treatment, but right now we're talking about medication to reduce the pain. So we already know this person is in a chronic illness. Now we're in a stage of not necessarily treating the person to cure, but right now we're treating the person to basically eliminate pain, to at least have them, let's say, a peaceful ending. So the second opinion basically considered that if the person is not going to be taking the medications or at least these painkillers, that that's going to mean the pain in itself is in itself basically a way of ibadah. Enduring pain is ibadah. Enduring pain is a way to help you get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's a strange opinion, but I'm just laying it out there. So do we have to medicate? The answer is no, you don't have to medicate. Should we medicate? Well, that's a differences of opinions. Now, I did actually do a whole article. It was like in 35 pages just about these topics and going into lots of details. So check it out, inshallah. So any
Yeah,
questions?
but this country, sorry, this
Yep.
country, they don't give a chance for the patient to give his opinion that he want to feel the pain, and he doesn't like the way they treat him. Yes, last year I attended this case with a friend to me. She has like 83, 84 years, and they put her in a, I don't know what you call this place, not a hospital, but to make her like die with peace without feel pain. They don't give her even IV. They said we are here not to treat her to live, but to make her die with peace. And when they bring this square spongy with at the top of the stick, and they put it at her lips, she tried to يعني suck it like a baby, and she is thirsty. يعني I feel that they torture her. She died with يعني عطشانة. It's not fair.
Right. So I agree with you on a couple things, but disagree on other things.
Mm.
So do they give you the option to choose whether it's do not resuscitate, whether it's choosing to not take painkillers or not taking any medication, etc. So it looks like you were actually talking about a situation that is in hospice.
Right.
Hospice is she was in hospice.
Yeah.
So hospice works differently. They're not going to give you the treatment because the doctors had already come to the conclusion that there's no cure for this case. So to give IV and to give medications, etc., that's basically just their view on it is that it's prolonging the suffering. Okay. So what they will give you, that's what the hospice that's what the hospice will basically just do, which is just give you different ways to help you endure the pain, to help you feel better, etc. But one thing I must agree with you on, which is their let's say they would pressure based on what they had learned that, for example, the sponge that you were talking about with the stick on it, no, don't give her water. It's just going to go on the bed. Don't give her this. Don't give her anything and basically make her die faster. The sunnah way to do this is when a person is dying. There are certain things that we have to keep this one in mind. Number one, when a person is dying, they're extremely thirsty. The hospice people will tell you, don't give them anything, don't give them anything, and they'll insist that you give nothing, but you have the right to say, my religious teachings actually instruct me to do this, and which is position them towards the Qibla. That's number one. Number two, to wet that sponge that you were talking about, or perhaps it doesn't have to be a sponge. Maybe you could have any towel, squeeze it, maybe the tip of the straw, maybe put some water. But if you put the water in their mouth with a straw, they're not going to be capable of sucking it out. I know if you basically put your finger at the other end of the straw and let it get some water, the water is going to squirt too fast, and they're not going to have the ability to basically suck it fast enough. So the water is going to squirt out of their mouth, or at least just basically just fall out of their mouth. So the wet sponge, just wet it and put it in their mouth, and the person is going to be just barely pressing on their jaw in order to get some of that water. So definitely do that. Number three is basically reading Surah Yasin. They don't have a problem. The hospice care doesn't have a problem with that. Number four is only letting in the people that the person had liked before. Okay. Number four, don't make any sounds, don't make any music. The hospice care will tell you, hey, we've got the option of music, we've got the option of, I don't know, dancing or whatever it is. All the music is usually the thing that they will introduce, and they would think that it gives the person peace of mind and whatever. But of course, reading Quran. Number five, I would say the part about, I guess, changing the person don't necessarily depends on what stage the person's at. You don't want to necessarily change their bedding and change everything. It depends on the situation that they're at. There's going to be a point when they're really starting to go through the secretions and all of that. At that moment, just turning them and switching their body side to side is going to increase the pain. So that's it. That would be good to change, and definitely the hospice care would always tell you want to rotate their body just so that their body doesn't get bed sores. So that is important, of course, before, but if we're talking about the very, very end of it, rotating their body right now, it's too late to rotate anything. Let this person just basically take their time, especially if we're talking about the secretions. So the hospice people, they've been in work for a very long time. They can anticipate when this person is going to be dying, looking at the signs that this person is showing. Usually signs like secretions, waking up and sleeping intermittently. That's usually that the person is getting really close. Could be a day, could be 2 days, could be 3 days. It's completely different than staying awake for a couple hours. Okay, staying awake for a couple hours, the body is showing that it's in a failure, but the person is still alert. But it isn't until the person starts to wake up 5, 10 minutes and then fall asleep all of a sudden, and then wake up 20 minutes, fall asleep all of a sudden. That's when you would know the secretions. You could see they can't feel things in their toes, then can't feel the things. This person is dying. So those are just some signs, really fast things. Okay. Is it sunnah reading Surah Yasin? Yes, reading Surah Yasin is a sunnah. It was actually mentioned in a hadith. So yes, you can read Surah Yasin. And the other thing I would like to say is reminding the person of the good things that they had done. So good things that they had probably done, donated, maybe took care of someone, basically get them hopeful in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they're going to meet their creator with a lot of good expectations, a lot of expectations that they will be given mercy, granted forgiveness, and so forth. So that's one thing that you would want to do. The other thing that I would like to mention about and I know we're kind of jumping off another topic right here within these topics, or another subtopic, I would say, is that when a person dies, so after death, Okay. The first thing that we would do is basically use the money to shroud and wash that dead person. That's the first thing. So before we even talk about inheritance, we gotta first use that money for burial, for shrouding. So burial cost depends on where. It can range from $1,500 to six and seven and even more thousands of dollars. So it depends on where, and we're talking about US dollars. In certain areas, you can bury somebody with $1,500. Muslim cemeteries, unfortunately, I don't know why, but you can have a cemetery ranging between 3,000, 4,000, 6,000. I don't understand why. To be honest, now, if you were to talk to the morticians, talk to the cemetery, they'll tell you that the reason for the cost is because we're paying the mortician, which is basically the person doing the washing and the shrouding, and that the city would mandate that there would be a specific chemical and specific chemicals to clean and basically for sanitary reasons to clean the area and use all these different products. But I doubt that it costs these numbers that they're claiming of, because other cemeteries, they're charging me 1,500, and they're the morticians there, they would pretty much do something really similar. So in fact, the work that the morticians do in non-Muslim sites, they actually do a lot more. And I've washed and shrouded the dead in Muslim shrouding and washing areas, and even in non-Muslim washing and shrouding areas. So I don't see much of a difference. In fact, those areas are a lot more complex, which is, we're talking about non-Muslim areas. Certainly, they would have a place where in the beginning you might think of it as spooky, but then you get used to it. So it's like a big, huge sink. It's like a huge sink where a body could fit in it. And there would be these things on the top to be able for one person to carry the body, basically strap it around the body in order to carry the body. A hose of water, basically water, and the sink basically has a drain in order to let any water basically drain in it. And that's also, they're also providing you with shrouds and all the different, I guess, items for the person that is washing the dead. We're talking about things like gloves that are really long gloves. So think of it as, kind of like the way that surgeons would wear. So they would have items like that. But the morticians in non-Muslim areas, they would basically put on a suit that probably the dead person wanted to be in. They would put on makeup, maybe lots of foundation to change the color and make it as appear as normal as possible. So the non-Muslim way of preparing the dead is, I would say, during our times, is definitely going to be more costly. But you would say that the Muslims are actually charging, I would say, way too much, way too much. Okay, so the other thing in
Maybe the
regards,
the cost of the place or the land he will bury.
well, yes, I mean, the cost of the land, the cost of the place, I mean, it's not like you're going to be buying, yes, maybe a good view. It's like, I
I
don't
know.
get it. I mean, seriously. I mean, seriously. It's not like I'm buying a good view on the seashore or next to the street and you want to avoid the highways. I mean, come on, come on. The prices sometimes are really ridiculous, really
Yeah.
ridiculous.
If it's 3,500 less than the house cost, two
You know,
three
we have,
thousand hundred. Yeah.
right, we have had Muslims actually not afford to be able basically to get buried, and they ended up cremating them. So, haram. This is going to be on our backs.
لا لا and our masjid alhamdulillah who hasn't money for the shop.
Alhamdulillah, but
And we
this
call
is.
it can the Muslim donate for him, or masjid can cover this.
Right, right. But it's alhamdulillah, like we do have Muslims that right now, I guess, collaborating better with each other than before because of social media, because of right now, I guess, the availability of
It's
communication.
still a problem though here.
It's still a problem. That's what I wanted to get to, Noura. It is still a problem. It's still a problem because, I mean, people are struggling to live. Now they're going to struggle to die.
Sure. It depends upon the state. It
People
depends
are
upon the
struggling
state.
to live.
Pretty much.
Exactly. Now they're struggling to die. It's like لا بالحياة مرتاح ولا بالموت مرتاح دخيل الله.
موت وخراب ديار.
والله العظيم لا هو مسكين لا هو في حياته مرتاح ولا هو بموته مرتاح دخيل الله.
But
All right,
depends on the state.
exactly. Allah al-Musta'an. All right, so now after the burial, that's when we would look into debts. Okay. We would look into what does the person owe, and of course, not everybody or anybody that claims that this person owed them some money, we're going to say, oh, really? Okay, that's okay. We'll just deduct that from the money that this person has or had left behind. No, we need documentation. We need witnesses to basically come forward and actually prove that this person did owe them some money. Now, it's important to mention that some people might come forward and let's say this person, when they were alive, let's say, I don't know, Saad. Okay, Saad was always there playing and hanging out with Mu'adh, and everything was fine. All of a sudden, after his death, Saad comes forward and tells Mu'adh's wife that, hey, he owes me $50,000. And she said, well, he never told me that. Do you have any evidences? He said, no, it was actually 12 years ago. He never paid it back to me. And she said, well, I'm sorry, but do you have any evidences? Did you did you at all have any witnesses, anybody to document this in any way? So in that situation, there are certain, let's call it debts. There are certain rights. Want to look at this one. تسقط بالتقادم. Okay. If you don't have, okay, if you don't have any evidence and you never brought it up during that person's life and nothing was out there, then sorry, time had passed and it kind of like think of it as expired for you to raise it.
For
Okay.
that, in the ayat al-mudayana, it said, فَاكْتُبُوهُ بَيْنَكُمْ.
Well, it happens sometimes. Yeah, I'm trusting this person. She's trusting me. And we get carried away with our trust, and then we forget that death is real. Okay, it can happen. It's like, I'll just give it back to you tomorrow. We don't really have to do all that formality of documenting everything. Okay, that's what sometimes we get carried away with, and then boom, death just comes to us when we would least expect it. Okay, pay the debts. Then that's where it comes in the will. Okay, that finally the will comes in. Well, not finally, because finally would be the inheritance. Okay, the will comes in before even passing out the inheritance. Okay, before even talking about the inheritance, we're going to be basically looking at the will, and based on the one, we're looking at documentation, documentation or perhaps witnesses, and they're the ones that are going to tell us whether there was a will or not, how are we going to do with the will, what are we going to do with it, and so forth. And that's why it's important to understand how to make all of that. And finally, the inheritance. I would like to mention that in regards to inheritance, there are, let's call it, I don't want to call it strict, but I'll call it intricate. There are very intricate rulings in regards to the laws of inheritance in Islam. So you've got something called al-asabat, you got something called al-fara'id, you got just different people who are considered as an immediate family, and let's call it a distant family, how distant, etc. Not everybody is necessarily an inheritor, but there are good websites. right now that are available, really good websites where you could list the relatives, list the money by the penny. And it'll ask you whether you want it based on madhab Shafi'i, Hanafi, whatever it is. You list the names, you list the numbers, you list the amount, you list by the penny, you list whatever property, etc. And then it will do the math for you. It will do the math for you and say, Ahmed gets this much, and this is the amount that he gets from the property. This is the amount that he gets from cash. This is the amount. Sara gets this much. Suad gets this much. Noura gets this much, whatever it is. And it will basically do the distribution. And this one does not inherit basically because mahjub or whatever. Then it'll give you. And so there are great websites that actually right now generate all of this for you, just to know what's out there in terms of resources to make sure that we understand this right. Okay, so inshallah, sorry, because I have an appointment. Let's see. Does preparing for death a sign of does preparing for death a sign of hopelessness, a negative thing? When we talk about death, well, the things related to it, it is said that it's something sad, negatives. So the Prophet ﷺ, in fact, had recommended that we would visit the grave sites, cemeteries. Remembering death is actually encouraged as a way of tazkiyah. But it's important to keep in mind, if we're talking about death, where it's encouraging you to probably invest more in good deeds, invest more in doing what's right. In other words, this remembrance is channeling you towards putting your energy in the right place, then that's a positive direction. But if this person is remembering death, and because they're remembering death, they're constantly going to anxiety, they don't want to function in life, they don't want to study, they don't want to do anything.
Or like if somebody
There you
was
could
mourning, if
or what is it,
somebody
Nura?
was mourning, like if somebody was mourning over a person and they're going like every day and spending so much time, right?
So if we're seeing signs of depression, we're seeing signs of anxiety, then there's nothing wrong with taking, let's call it treatment, getting therapy that is needed for that person. Then in that situation, this is not positive, then this is negative. This is going the wrong direction. Okay, that might need intervention from specialists to help the person basically channel that mood to go to the right direction, because the right direction is to get the remembrance of death or the remembrance of the end of life, etc., to help you get motivated to doing what's right. But if such a remembrance is making you lose motivation, then there's definitely something that needs intervention, perhaps from the outside, to help you steer it on the inside towards the right direction. Because this person, if they go really deep with their depression, they could become suicidal, they could basically become addicts and search for different ways to get them out of the situation that they're in. And addiction is basically getting stronger for situations or in situations like this. Okay, so indefinitely, this person's not going to be functioning even as a good Muslim, because they're not going to be probably doing well in their schoolwork, in their jobs, in their perhaps even at home. If it's a mother, she's basically not wanting to work. Now their house is this dirty and all of that. Then we're looking at a situation that really requires intervention from specialists, because this is a negative way of thinking about death. And then in that situation, this needs treatment. So I hope I answered that question. Let's see. If someone lends money to someone because of a person, but if that person dies, will be, so if a person, if you lend someone some money, okay, and that person dies, then the inheritors, even if that person, let's call him, I don't know, Scene, okay, Scene died, and anyways, well, he borrowed, I don't know, $100 from you, and he didn't pay back. Well, that's because he doesn't even have $100 to pay you back. This person died. So who's going to pay you back the money? The ones that were inheritors, if this person had $100,000, would basically be the ones responsible to pay the debt. So why? Because of a general rule in Islam, it's called al-ghunmu bil-ghurm. What does al-ghunmu bil-ghurm mean? Not al-ghanam, al-ghunm. Al-ghunmu bil-ghurm. What does that mean? Al-ghunm is basically al-ghanima. It's basically the booty. Bil-ghurm is basically the debt that you owe. So just like you as inheritor, you would be there if this person had the money, and you would be the first to stand forward and say, hey, I get some of that money, you know, I'm here. We would say, yes, hey, بالغرم too, you would also supposedly, you're also supposed to be there to basically cover الغرامة, to cover whatever fines or fees this person owes too. So if the father died, for example, or the brother died and he owed some money, or if your brother had $1 million, are you going to stand up and say that you want the money, or are you going to say, I have nothing to do with my brother? No, you're going to stand up and actually say, I'm here, I'd like some money. Well, just like you would be the one to get money, you would also be the person to be responsible on behalf of the deceased to pay the fines that were due on that person. But I hated my brother. At the end, he's your brother. He's a responsibility. You have to take in that responsibility to support and to direct and make sure that this person's debt is paid off.
I
This
have
is,
a question.
go ahead, Nora.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so in order for let's say the person died, and all of a sudden someone comes to you and said, oh, this person owed me money, whatever. Would they have to have evidence that they owed that money?
Absolutely, Nora, they have to have evidence.
Okay, just making sure.
Unless it was known, for example, that Muhammad owes Tariq $50,000, and the person that was deceased, which is Muhammad in this example, Muhammad never objected. And of course, here we go. We said Tariq borrowed $50,000, and Muhammad never objected. He's like, okay, yeah, I do. So there's الاعتراف سيد الأدلة. And everybody knows that Muhammad had mentioned a couple times that Tariq basically, or Muhammad owes Tariq $50,000, for example. So do I have to have a written statement? If it is known to all of us, there doesn't have to be a written statement, because this is shahada that is bigger than me coming forward. It's a shahada that involves all these people that are witnesses. It's in shahada where I remember Muhammad telling me that he owed $50,000, for example. Okay. So that isn't enough shahada. It doesn't have to be a witness where I'm seeing, you know, the money handed down, and the money, yes, received, gave it, whatever it is. I don't have to necessarily see that. I don't have to see the whole receive and give situation. I just have to know that Muhammad one day, he basically said that he owes Tariq $50,000, or that Tariq was always saying that and Muhammad never objected. That's enough. Okay, that's a witness. All right, so I have to go to an appointment. Inshallah, we'll see you all tomorrow for, of course, the tafsir for that ayah, because there's so much to say still. We're still in the very beginning, but inshallah.
You gotta get those boxes off your screen somehow.
Oh, they're still there, Noura?
Yeah, they're haunting you.
Oh dear. Okay. All right. I know I was actually trying. How about this one? Took one out.
It's doing it's just weird. I don't know what it is, but
I know. I was working on it for like an hour and a half today. I even asked my chat GBT and he was giving me ideas, but still didn't help. So
see,
we'll figure.
that GPT doesn't know everything.
Well, he did actually do a good job in giving me different options, Noura. So we'll give him
I'm just
credit for
kidding. I'm
that.
just kidding.
We'll give him credit for that, okay?
Okay, I'm excited about tomorrow. And by the way, Dr. Muna's class, mashallah, was